Welcome, everyone, to the Find Your Flow podcast by Highland Yoga, hosted by founder Elsie Brotherton and co-hosts Reedy Dukes and Annalie Burke. Highland Yoga is an Atlanta-based hot yoga studio founded in 2015 in the quaint neighborhood of Virginia Highlands. And it's hard to wrap our minds around just how much we've grown and evolved since then. We already know our community is hooked on whatever magic is within our walls, and we want to offer you more outside of that. We can't wait to dive deep into all things yoga and wellness, but more importantly, what makes our world go round: our teachers, our devoted students, our community offerings, and more. Thanks for tuning into the podcast.
All right, welcome to this week's episode of Find Your Flow. We're really excited today to have with us Annalie Burke, Reedy Dukes as usual, and then special guest Amanda Whooley, who is a regular Highland Yoga student and is here to share about her yoga journey as well as her very interesting life. So we're excited to have you here today, Amanda. Welcome.
Hi.
Hey, y'all. How's it going today?
It's going pretty good. A rainy little Monday.
Reedy, what's going on with you?
I am just me and my pup all day long.
So the topic for today, or one theme for this discussion, is resilience, and specifically how we can use our yoga practice to cultivate resilience that can help us in other parts of our life. So before we get into our interview with Amanda, I kind of just want to open it up to everybody to share their experience with resilience in yoga. If any, how has yoga helped you cultivate resilience in your life?
I think for me personally, yoga has really opened my eyes to practicing the practice of resilience. So maybe this time on your mat, you're not showing up how you did yesterday or how you'll show up in 3 days from now, but recognizing this is where I'm at today and using this will help me get through to the next thing and the next hard experience, and just breathing through it all will really help. And it's pretty amazing to see yourself have maybe one of your practices that you didn't love. And we all have those, right? Where we come off our mat and we're like, well, I didn't do exactly what I wanted to do today, but I did do it. And then the next day being like, oh, that set me up for today's practice and today's lesson. And oh, I wasn't doing that yesterday, but here I am today, and kind of seeing that every day is a little different and you got to show up regardless. Practice the practice.
I think that's right. Yeah, kind of the same for me. I think the practice of showing up every day, regardless of what happens on my mat, helps me. It's a practice of resilience. Because I think for me, so many of the hard things in my life that I feel like I've had to tackle, the best way to tackle them, the best way to have resilience in the face of challenges, is to really just put my head down and take one step at a time. And I feel like that is what my yoga practice is. It doesn't matter what's going on in my head that day. It doesn't matter how I'm feeling. I just put my head down, I show up, and I do the work. And it doesn't matter how sloppy or uncomfortable it was, the act of doing it itself helps me practice the resilience, I think. And then I think another really important thing is the breath. And, how breath driven our classes are in particular, but learning breathing techniques for stress, basically. When I feel challenged, I know that I can turn to my breath to help kind of balance my nervous system a little bit more and find that resilience, find the strength to take the next step forward and whatever it is that I'm dealing with.
Yeah, definitely.
Reedy, what about you? Resilience in yoga?
Yeah, what I love about yoga and showing up no matter how you're feeling that day, it's kind of hard to avoid how you're feeling. It's going to show up when you get still and everything's quiet, and it's a way to move through that. Whereas if I were at home experiencing that, maybe I would instead just avoid what was coming up by distracting or whatever it may be. And something I've learned along the way is basically avoiding something is the number one thing that perpetuates anxiety. So it's really just all about moving through it, and showing up and being honest with yourself.
Mhm.
So that yoga's played a huge role in that journey for me. And that's why I'm going to keep practicing lifelong.
I love that so much.
Good.
Amanda,
Yeah.
we're very curious about your answer to this question, but before we get into it, I actually just want to intro you properly. So Amanda is an extremely dedicated student at Highland Yoga Decatur, and her teachers report that she walks in the front door just beaming. She is such a positive light for our community, and the more you learn about her, the more inspired you are by her strength and her resilience. Amanda has a pretty impressive marathon track record and is most proud of running the Boston Marathon and 2 international marathons, Dublin, Ireland, and Cork, Ireland. Sounds amazing. When she is not practicing at Highland Yoga, she is teaching philosophy at Oglethorpe University, where she was awarded the Excellence in Teaching Award for being voted the most transformative professor for students based on student evaluations. She has spent her last 10 summers teaching in Greece, Rome, and Barcelona. We are so excited to be able to catch her before she leaves for her summer adventures. Welcome, Amanda. It's such a treat to have you on the podcast today.
Thank you. I feel very honored to be here.
So, resilience in yoga. I think before we get to that question, I just want to hear more about when did you start practicing yoga? How did you end up at Highland Yoga?
So I started in September. It'll be my 3-year anniversary with Highland Yoga. And so I'm very happy about that. And I've stayed consistent. But prior to that, I had zero experience with yoga. So Highland was sort of my first. And I think it'll remain my one and only. So yeah, it was about 3 years ago I started, and I found Highland Yoga sort of just on a whim. I get my hair cut in the same place that the Highland Yoga on Memorial Drive is. And I kept walking by and I was like, I'm just gonna sign up. So I started going to Memorial, and then the Decatur studio opened, and a little bit more convenient for me on my way home from work. So ended up spending I still my classes at the Decatur studio. So
That's very cool. Very cool. Yeah, it's cool to see that Decatur community grow because we opened it at the height of COVID, like September 1st, 2020. And we really thought that it was totally doomed. And there was a time when we thought about just closing that location entirely because it just felt like we were never going to be able to grow it. And now looking at it, it's like, wow, this community is so incredible. We've got great energy there and so many dedicated students. So very happy about that. Okay, cool. So you've been practicing for about 3 years. Why yoga? What has yoga done for you?
this is it's a very complicated answer to that question. And I could probably talk for hours. I think like a lot of human beings, I've had a very complicated relationship with my body, especially as a woman. And part of that complication is that I always thought of my body and my mind as separate, right? And we're sort of taught to think that, right? Like there's a difference between your body and your soul or your body and your mind. And sort of starting from that place, I don't think I ever had any integration or coherence or harmony between my mind and my body. It was like my body was something I would just force to do things that I would use and abuse in particular ways. Like, if I want it, I will make my body do it. And that was especially true with running long distances. I didn't care, or I didn't know how. I think it was more how. I didn't know how to listen to my body. I had never done it. I'd only listened to what is it that I want? What is it that I want to accomplish? And then forcing my body to do it. It was just a tool that was separate from me in some ways. And after years of doing that, I just felt broken. Like, not just like physically, I certainly started to feel broken. Like, I was constantly injured. I was always tired. And I just thought, oh, I just need a rest day, which even that was hard for me because there was no passion or compassion I felt for my body. It was just like a rake or a hammer, something I would just take out of the shed. So I was like, I got to do something. I don't know
What
where
do
to.
you think brought that on? Just not feeling in touch with your body, or was there something else that was kind of, contributing to that feeling of disconnect and lack of well-being generally?
I think two things maybe. One, I was just depressed all the time and I had so much in my life to be thankful for. So it was like, what wasn't working here, right? Like, I just felt like I couldn't find any joy in things. And I would still walk into my classrooms or whatever and perform excitement. And that starts to wear on you, right? So I think I'm not sure where that depression came from, but I was thinking in response to your question, that's one of the reasons, like maybe the depression was coming from the fact that I wasn't giving my body any breaks at all.
Is this when you were training for marathons, like deep into just heavy body
deep
work?
deep into it. And then I think the other reason that maybe caused me to like start to notice like this fracture in a way that I hadn't really let myself notice it was that brought me to yoga. One of the reasons I started doing hardcore running was for my mom, who was like my best friend, my role model. She was an amazing teacher. She was just a woman. And she died. And that like shifted everything in my life. Like it was like all of a sudden, like if your life had been organized around this axis and all of a sudden that axis goes like this, I didn't even recognize the world anymore or my place in it or my identity in it. And that's when I started to do hardcore marathons. I think it was a way for me to get out whatever grief was in me, but also to distract myself. Um, and then I think as I slowly started, you never get over something like that, but as I slowly started to assimilate and start to have a kind of life with this new axis, that sounds like, oh, great. So you're sort of integrated the grief. But it was like, as soon as that got integrated, all of a sudden it was like I could see my life. And that's where I feel this fracture that I had been distracting myself from. And yeah. So I think that is ultimately what caused me to like notice. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense, and it resonates a lot. And thank you for sharing that and for being vulnerable on this podcast. Okay, so you're going through this journey of very intense physical training and coping and processing grief and coming out on the other end, and then you show up at yoga. So how did yoga, what happened at yoga? What happened there? How does it work for you? I'm always curious. It's kind of like an elusive thing, right? Because you're going into this room and you're doing these movements and you're breathing for an hour and it's hot and there's music and somehow like transformation occurs, right? So how does it work for you?
I mean, I was like thinking about this and I was thinking about it also in relation to the question of resilience. And but I feel like there's like pieces. Like I can't even describe how much yoga has given me. And it is something that, to the point where when I roll out my mat, I like got this sense of like home. Like that's what it feels like coming home. Like as soon as I roll my mat out, it's like, it's not just safe. There's so much more to it, but it literally feels like walking home, just rolling out that mat. There's just like this stuff that washes over me. So I want to say first, like one of the things that kept me coming back. So there's all sorts of, I'll get into like maybe the more substantive stuff, but one of the things that kept me coming back to Highland yoga, when there's obviously there's a ton of studios around, but it was the teachers. It's the teachers, and they're the ones that still get me coming back. And it's because I don't know how to say this, but I guess as a teacher, I recognize the power of believing in what you do. And like genuinely believing it, even on bad days, like being a teacher where a student can recognize this person is not doing this just for the money. This person is literally genuinely committed to what they want to as students. And that's what I felt from that's still what I have felt from every teacher that I've ever had at Highland Yoga. And that is something that I really admire. I know how hard it is, even on bad days, to show students that you are committed, because teachers are willing to talk about, I can't tell you how many instructors have talked about their own weaknesses, like in class. And to me, it's like, I wanted to be in a community where I could trust that the people who were guiding me were still learning with me. Like, to me, that's the best kind of teacher, is the one who's still learning and practicing. So that's what kept me coming back, right? Like in the door every day. Because if I didn't like, for me, it could never just be for me walking in there and somebody just like rotely calling out poses. That was not going to do it for me. I had to like trust or see something in the teachers, and I saw it at Highland Yoga. So so that's one thing.
We love to hear it. Like, good job, whoever got you in that first like 60 days.
Well, I go to Reedy like every Thursday. So.
We have really good people who really do believe in what they're doing. And we have a really, well, yes, we don't have to talk about us, but yeah, great. I love it.
I mean, but I just want to say, like, I can't say that I did all the work by myself. I had people, the teachers, who helped me figure out how to do the work. So it's never like, I can't take full credit for what yoga's given me, I guess. But
we like to think of our teachers as really like facilitators, guides, and not necessarily, we're not like guru based style of yoga or anything like that. So it's really just show up to facilitate, and we call it taking people to the Grand Canyon. So in our teacher training, we talk about like when you're teaching a yoga class, you can tell them about the Grand Canyon. Like you're going to be so relaxed, you're going to be so happy, you'll be so present and whatever. Or you can take them to the Grand Canyon where, they are just in that state, and if you've ever been to the Grand Canyon, I actually went like a couple of years ago. And when I got there, I was like, oh, this is an amazing metaphor. This is great. So this totally works. Yeah. So yes, you are being taken to the Grand Canyon is what I'm hearing, which I love.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. I mean, I could talk more about that, like the teachers.
Well, okay. So the actual practice for you, is there something about the actual practice experience? Yeah. And I think especially as a person who studies like metaphysics and philosophy, I'm just curious if there's anything that happens there, any kind of intersection.
Oh yeah. Like I would say I can't separate yoga from the rest of my world, especially philosophy. Yoga, historically, Western philosophy has been committed to this idea of the mind taking priority over the body, and that we can make mental choices, and those are more important, more valuable, more informative than what we do with our bodies, right? So if anything, like what I mean, there's a list of things, but Highland yoga certainly taught me they are not separate, right? That where my body is going to affect my mood. Where my mood is going to affect my body. And so, uh, probably the first thing I started to learn as a student was just how to listen. Like I think people underestimate how hard and important of a skill listening is in general, just like listening to other people, but just listening to my own body without lying, without like pretend listening. I feel like I like up to that point I like pretend listen to my body. Like sometimes I pretend relax, and it's not until like 20 minutes later I'm like, guess I wasn't really relaxed. Where you feel a muscle melt. So it's like to really, and it was hard, like to do it where I don't rationalize in a way to just listen to my body. And with the breath work and just the time, how just the practice itself, I just started to just listen, not judge it, not try to rationalize it, not let it go the filter of my mind, but just listen. And that was huge for me because listening started to teach me compassion with myself. Like I probably, maybe it was like after like a year of practicing yoga, I one day I just woke up. I know this sounds really weird, but I just woke up and I felt like my body was like, I'm so happy we're becoming friends. Like my body was talking to me, like being like, okay, we're getting like we weren't fully friends yet, but I'm so happy we're becoming friends. So so I think that was the sort of entry big moment of my that I learned from yoga practice. But then I think the other two main things that my practice gives to me and continues to give to me, um, and I think it is what, in a weird way, it's how yoga has helped me be resilient as opposed to just bullying myself, which I think we can mistake as resilience. And I think up until this point, my resilience was simply bullying and being very like, nope, you're doing this, you're doing this. But actual resilience, I think I started to learn from practicing yoga. And the two things, and I'm still working on them, obviously, it's never finished, but is I have always been unfortunately, not a high achiever. I am not a high achiever, but I've always been the bad high achiever. I've been a perfectionist. And perfectionism is such a disease that it just it takes away any joy. And what yoga and practicing yoga started, it gave me a space on my mat to start to ameliorate and get rid of a lot of tendencies of perfectionism. It allowed me, like, it teaches me how to, like, try something and it doesn't matter if it looks funny. It's not, there's nothing perfect in yoga, right? Like, I am usually just on my mat, but there's like occasions, like I'll get into a triangle and I'll just kind of glance, like the room comes to me and I'm like, look at all this variety. Like there's no, so it gives me, it taught me how to, I guess I'll just put this simply. It taught me strangely that how to fail and fail and not feel ashamed of myself and fail and not feel like there's something wrong with me. Cause it was like, I wasn't good at it, right? I can't touch my toes. I like I feel crippled like sometimes, like when I can't do crazy poses, but it doesn't matter. Like it just, I wasn't good. And and I'm not, I can't do certain things. It's like there's nothing, I don't feel like there's anything at stake. And so I don't know. It's like that to me has been the biggest thing.
Well, that's a
biggest
pretty
has
big
ever.
one. And I think to your point, it feels like sometimes there are very few things in life where there isn't much at stake that you're putting this much time and energy into, if that makes sense,
Yeah.
And yeah, it does feel like the perfect forum, or what's the word I'm looking for? I think forum, where you can
Yeah.
practice being and failing, and like the practices being like completely okay with it. Right.
Yeah.
And just having that self-love and self-compassion, and removing the goal orientation, removing the fixation on whatever the form is. And, yeah, I love that so much. And I think that's a great way to articulate, I think, a shared experience that many have.
Yeah. I think we don't talk about that enough, about how much it does help with, so many of us are perfectionists, and like we don't realize that doing the yoga daily or weekly, however often you're doing it, it does help you kind of get out of that mindset a little and be like, oh, I messed up today on my mat, but at the end of the class, I'm not thinking about the fact I messed up in one thing. And
Yeah.
how does that then integrate into the rest of our lives? I think that's
Yeah, it's like I don't feel like a failure. Like when I leave a yoga class, I feel even better. It's like, because I think so many of us, like, we don't even realize how ingrained that perfectionism
Right.
has come into us. And the more I practice yoga, the stronger and more joyful I feel, because I am showing like just like perfection is a myth. It doesn't exist,
Mhm.
right? It literally does not exist. And so yoga has taught me how beautiful, like, perfection's not beauty. Like beauty comes in all these ways. And so it sounds bad, but I'm like, yoga taught me how to fail. And I love yoga for that reason.
I think it's great. So we're having a guest come on, Kara Pepper, in a couple weeks, and she's a physician, and she describes herself as a recovering perfectionist. So she does a lot of work and a lot of coaching and mentorship for physicians primarily, but others around dismantling perfectionism. And so that whole podcast is going to be about perfectionism and yoga. So I'm very excited for that. And then just one more thing to add before we move on. One of my favorite quotes is from Sean Korn, who's longtime yoga teacher. And she says, it's not about what the pose looks like. It's about who you are when you get there, which I think just that sums it up,
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. So resilience, we've got dismantling perfectionism as a
And then
practice in yoga. And then number two.
the number two, which is related to dismantling perfectionism, is I think in our society, so certainly in my life, we just don't have a lot of room for play
Mm.
and
Mm.
curiosity. Like we talk about, let's hone our critical thinking skills. And like those are great. This can be very helpful, like when you're like buying a car or something. Like, but the idea, I don't know, like, but like to me, the most undervalued like traits are curiosity and wonder, and just like the definition of play is to literally play, like be in a place where nothing is do whatever, right? Nothing's at stake. So it
Yeah.
goes hand in hand with this perfectionism. And in yoga, like it's like there's something so, even though it might not seem like it when you're sweating and you're very hot, it's like there's something so playful about it,
Mhm.
because it's like you're not holding on, you're not shutting your mind down, right? But you're like letting it play with your body, letting your body play, and like, wow, discovering new things. And then sometimes you're like, oh, maybe I'll try it this way, right? And that to me has helped me cultivate more of a sense of courage
Mm.
and playfulness and freedom and experimentation in my life, which was I'm such a creature of routine and habit because with perfectionism comes control, right? I need to control my environments. I need to curate when I'm like vulnerable or curate when I'm playful or when I experiment. But yoga's taught me like to just be more open to like, I'm just going to experiment today. I don't have to go do this routine, or maybe I'll try this. And it's not just play for, I mean, it's play, but then you end up with more courage, more joy, more, honestly, for me, it's made me a more open and loving person to other people. Because when you have a kind of play built into you, now it's like anytime I see an instructor, another person in the class, there is that willingness to experiment with different personalities and different ideas and different cares. So it just kind of, none of this happens like consciously, right? But it's like all of a sudden, I notice myself more. I don't know. I wouldn't even, it's not tolerance because I think tolerance is like gross. It's more, yeah, like arms open, like
Openness.
Yeah.
And
I feel like you see that with yoga people. So I went to a party over the holidays and it was like all Highland yoga people from the neighborhood. And I was walking out of the party and this guy is walking in and he goes, man, those people are so happy. All those people are so happy. And I was like, yeah, it's because they do yoga. And he goes, that's it. It's the yoga. Hopefully he's coming to the studio. And that was, that was in Virginia Highland. So yeah, I think that's totally right. And I feel like I can always tell if someone's a yoga person because they do have this kind of characteristic openness that I feel like we kind of beat out of people in society a little bit,
yeah.
as
It's
we're
like
raised. Yeah.
you follow these patterns, like so much of our life. It's like, here's follow these rules, follow these rules, follow these rules. But just having time where there's no rules, you just experiment with yourself. It's like, it just opens up. I mean, I'm all for a little bit of rebellion against the status quo. So it like opens up like new possibilities, I think, mentally and physically. That I have like, well, three things I want to say. Okay. How do I say this? So every single day, when I think about what I've learned from my yoga practice, trying to correct my perfectionist tendencies to playfulness and experimentation, there are like, it's funny, three different yoga teachers at Highland Yoga have said three things, that I carry with me every single day, all the time. And it's funny because I don't even think these instructors realize sometimes when they say something, how it like, oh, it just like grabs, the random person because of who I am or what any person's what's going on with their life at that time. But I just want to say the three phrases that I've learned because they're like, in some ways, they're what keep me resilient off the mat. Like if I feel like, okay, I notice I'm sliding back to this thing during a given day, I will remember like one of these and it gets me back. So one of them is something that Reedy says every single day, every class, to have gratitude for your strong, your resilient mind, and your loving spirit. And that has saved my life like multiple times just because of my own self-loathing sometimes, right? Or a perfectionist moment will happen and I feel like a failure and like I hear Reedy's voice. It just like brings me back. And then another teacher just kind of randomly said, I think it was random, but it like hit me hard, was all it is skillful use of breath and motion. And it didn't hit me because of yoga, it hit me. I was like, yeah, that's all life is a skillful use of breath and moving. And it just was like so poignant to me in those moments. So that again, when you have one of those days where it just feels crashing, it's like it's just breath and motion, right? All we can do is breathe our best and move through this, move our best. And then another teacher at one point, maybe this is because I think about the meaning of life, another teacher at one point said, all it is shapes. And I was like, huh, it is kind of true. Our lives are just different shapes. Every day is a different shape. And we can get into those shapes. We can move out of those shapes, but we don't need to attach more to it than that. Sometimes, it's just shapes with breath, a little motion, and a little gratitude. That's all life is. If I put them all together.
We try to make it a lot more complicated than that, I think.
Yeah, we try to make it.
Anyone else making it complicated?
Like sometimes that's all it is. It's just you could have a great life with gratitude, right? A little motion, a little breath, and some shapes. Like
Okay, so I love all that. Thank you for sharing. I feel like we should get you some like little inspiration cards with these quotes like framed after this probably. So you can hang them up.
Tattooed on me.
Yes, yes. So I think this is a somewhat interesting segue, perhaps way to transition into your work in philosophy, your research, and also you're a philosophy teacher. We'd love to hear well, first of all, at some point, I'd love to come back and have a conversation with you about yoga philosophy and the whole world of yoga metaphysics. But I don't know if we're ready for that conversation today, but I would just love to hear about if yoga has shaped your thinking about philosophy and your research at all, like your embodied experience in yoga. And then also I just want to hear about your work and your teaching, just out of curiosity, unrelated to yoga.
So yeah, like I said, I can't really separate any of these things. I think philosophy made me open to trying yoga and also maybe in some ways forced me to go to yoga. But also, as my yoga the more I practice, simply because the more I learn about myself, that automatically is going to shift and shifts the way that I approach texts, certain perennial human questions. So in general, there's always a conversation, as I see it, between yoga and what I do in philosophy. It certainly made me I think I was already an okay philosopher, but I don't know. But It definitely made me a better philosopher because of this like experimentation, right? People think like philosophy is certainly a discipline that requires a lot of mind and focus and argumentation and lots of texts. But probably the most important skill for a philosopher isn't a very acute rational capacity. It is the ability to be creative and think of new solutions to very classical questions that we all deal with and have been dealing with for centuries. And so the more playful I get, right? Obviously in yoga, the better I get at just thinking through some of the questions I'm interested in as a philosopher. And it's strange. Like I'm a kind of walking contradiction because I'm such a perfectionist, but philosophy has no answers. So it's like it's like this weird, but it's definitely, I think maybe it's because it didn't have any answers and I'm a perfectionist and I was like, I love philosophy, I'm gonna solve it. Right. Or something in me was like new. Like I was gonna gravitate precisely to that thing that I'm not, to let myself have no answers. And like so yoga's got me better there. But so I teach my research, like as you mentioned earlier, back when I got my PhD was metaphysics.
Which for anyone listening, tell us about metaphysics, just in a nutshell. What
in
is
a
the study of
nutshell,
metaphysics?
So philosophy is broken up into several different areas based on the kinds of questions it asks. So there's lots of subfields in philosophy and people specialize. So probably the most common is ethics, which is, asking questions about value. What is right? What is wrong? What does it mean to live a good life? What does it mean to be a good person? Those sorts of things. And then metaphysics asks questions about the nature of things. So the nature of reality, like how do we know that the information that is given to us from our senses is actually an accurate depiction of the world, right? Like, how do I know that this is real? And it's not just that. It's like when we say, "Oh, that's real," it's like, what do we mean? Like, what makes something like this world more real than a dream world? Because there's certainly cultures who think that the dream world has much more reality than the waking life. So it's like, how do we how are we defining those things? And then metaphysics can get a little bit more specific, asking about the very nature of specific things, like what is a person? How do we define a person? What characteristics does something need in order to qualify as a creature with moral standing or legal standing? That's like one of the big debates about like abortion or animal rights. Like, is a fetus a person? Is an octopus a person?
Well, that could be an interesting question with AI and, human androids or whatever. Do you know what I mean? Like that will be relevant in a really different, weird context soon.
Oh yeah. Like that has definitely become more and more relevant. And the flip side of it, like one of the things that we talked about in one of my classes this semester was, so there's this like question like about machine intelligence. What counts as intelligence? Are machines capable of it? Blah, blah, blah. Personhood status of androids. But it was the reverse that was also important. It's that the fear over artificial intelligence isn't simply that, oh, these creatures might end up having rights, like these machines, but it's also the fear that we are becoming more like machines. Mm-hmm. Like, because we are just following these algorithms and these sort of methods of consumption. And so there's this, I think the fear isn't just that these machines will actually qualify with legal rights or something, but it's rather we're terrified of our own future, that we might be becoming less humane.
Well, that's why I think yoga is going to be even more important. Yoga makes you very human.
I agree. Like, because we're not algorithmic. We're not perfect. There's nothing black or white about these things. 100%. So that's why, so yoga is definitely.
The practice of being human is really what I think of my yoga practice, because it's really the one thing that totally detaches me from all of my technology during the day. And yes, it's very awesome. I have great optimism for Highland yoga in the future as, AI continues to improve. Anyway, that's very, very cool.
So I did a lot of my research back in the day. I mean, I'm old, was in physics, but probably in more recent years, it's been in existentialism, which is a later movement in philosophy that really, I mean, its name is what it is. It's about what does it mean to exist as a human being? How do we characterize what it's like to live with our bodies, in our world? And once we kind of can characterize that, like, what does it mean to just feel and breathe and live as a human? Then the question is, well, is there anything meaningful or significant about our lives? So so this is where a lot of my research is. It's
big
a
question.
lot of people, a lot of people think existentialism is like dark and European, but it's actually not dark at all. There's a lot of really like joyful, beautiful answers that existentialists give, even though there's this like weird, incorrect pop culture view of existentialism as being like nihilistic or dark and dreary. It's not at all. Certainly there could be there are some existentialists that might have a darker tone, but as a whole, they're not nihilistic. Because nihilism means there's no meaning or value, whereas a lot of existentialists are like, yeah, there's, but here's where the joy could be. Here's where fullness can be. Here's where one can have a really beautiful life.
Yeah, and that gave way to the whole branch of existentialist psychology, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And it was like, because you get to choose, right? So you get more like behavior therapy, because the idea is like, if we reject the notion that there's some like overarching design or purpose for our lives, that we like a blueprint that we have to kind of like live up to, if we reject that, it returns us to like, you choose the things you want to value. You choose what's going to make your life meaningful. And that choice is empowering.
Yep.
It's also terrifying because we can't like blame other people. Like, well, my life's this way because of this, grand design. So it can be both terrifying, but also really empowering, I think. So I find myself often, after like, not during, but when I go into a yoga class, it's always a choice. And it's a choice because it makes it fills my life. And for no other, like, I don't personally believe that there's an overarching meaning or purpose or significance to my life. But I do think I get up out of bed in the morning. I think a full life to me is to actually live, which means to feel my body, to feel my emotions, to maximize my potential as a creature. And that means being loving, being physical, being thoughtful, every part, being social. To me, that is life, right? And anything that's alive is growing. So yeah, maybe there's no overarching meaning, except for me, the fullness of life is just life itself. Life understood is every single one of our capacities at work all at the same time. It's like a flow in the sense that you're like, I'm nailing every aspect of being this creature. Like nailing, even that includes failing, like feeling anger, because it's like, that's still mine. That's still life. That means I'm alive. I'm not just like a drone.
Would it be safe to say that you are finding your flow?
I mean, yeah, every day I try to find it. Sometimes I feel like I was on a kayak that flipped, like back river, but every day I'm
Get back, you're still flowing. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
I was waiting for that.
Yeah, I know. I can't help it. I'm so sorry. This has been such an awesome discussion. Amanda, so we have like a lot of other questions on our list, but I actually think what you just said is the perfect way to end this podcast, because it's just like a beautiful endorsement of you and your practice and all of the good things, I think, generally, yoga and otherwise. It was a very fascinating conversation. And
I thank you guys for, like I said, for talking to me.
Well, it's been a pleasure, and best of luck this summer. Reedy and Annalie, great to catch up with you as always. We will see you next time on Find Your Flow, the Highland Yoga Podcast. Bye, guys.
Bye. Thank you.